All right, so here is the story. On Unit Exam 4, we are officially scheduled for the final exam to be on here, December 10th, which is a Wednesday, right? From 4 o'clock, not 5, from 4 o'clock until 6:30. So what is supposed to happen on this day? You come to class, you take exam 4, you finish exam 4, you hand it in, and you tell us if you want to take exam 5 or the cumulative final, right? Now, if you want to take the cumulative final, we allow you to, take your cheat sheet and pick up the exam, the cumulative final, go back to your seat, and you finish your exam and you hand it in. Did I tell you you can have a cheat sheet? Oh, that's the news. Good news. Happy Thanksgiving, right? You can have your cheat sheet. Yay! Now, the question is, how big is a regular 8.5 by 11, which of course there is no paper over here. Regular piece of paper, 8.5 by 11, right? If you want to have a little index card, that's fine with me. If you want to have a poster, that's not fine with me. It has to be 8.5 by 11, yes. Front and back. You can write it by hand, you can print it, you can type it, you can do whatever you want with it. It's your cheat sheet, yeah. Yeah. The cumulative exam is, the whole class is free game, I mean, it's fair. Fair game, yeah. 50 questions, yeah. I might put some extra credit questions, but 50 questions, 100 points. You're welcome. All right, so any more questions about the cheat sheet? Yeah. I did not specify inches, but a regular piece of paper that you put in a regular printer is 8.5 by 11 inches. If you want to use centimeters, it's okay too, but you're going to be at a disadvantage. No, you cannot use feet or meters or any other measurement that is not a regular piece of paper that you get from a printer. All right, 8.5 by 11 inches. Everybody cool? Okay, yeah. So yeah, but cheat sheet is only for the cumulative final, not for exam 4. Okay? All right. Okay, so the deal here, if you want to take it on December 10th, that is fine with me, so everything is set, fine. Now, I am doing the rebalancing here of the topics so that we'll be done with the topics that we have to cover within this week and next week, right? So that we're going to finish a week earlier, because I decided to put here for this Monday and Wednesday, which is the last week just before Thanksgiving break, right? If you want to take your exam 4 early, before Thanksgiving, then you come to class on a Monday, November 17, and you take your exam 4, okay? If you want to take the cumulative final before the break, so you come to class on Wednesday, the 19th, and you can take your cumulative final. And yes, you can use your cheat sheet for that day as well, okay? The next question is going to be, are the exams going to be the same? No, the exams are going to be slightly different, because I know how it works in these classes. You got the chat people, and people going to tell each other, you know what is in the exam, you want to know what is in the exam, then you're going to start charging people, black market questions. I know how that goes. All right. So if you're going to take more time to study and you're going to come to class on the 10th to take the exam, it's going to be a bit different. Okay? But you have more time to study. Right? Yeah. Well, I don't know. Of course, yeah. Yeah, so the question is, can you choose to take exam 4 on this day on the 17th and then take the cumulative final on the 10th? Yeah, you can use whatever combination you would like. Well, not really whatever combination. You have to take exam 4 first, and then you take the final. If you want to take 4 here and final here, fine. You want to take 4 here and final there, okay. If you want to take 4 and final on the same day on the 10th, it's fine with me. Okay, yeah.
The cheat sheet just for the cumulative, or is it also for exam 4?
Yeah, the cheat sheet is only for the cumulative exam, not for exam 4. Yeah. Okay, so this is the question. If you take your exam on the 17th, will you know the grade before the cumulative? No. But you have to have a good gut feeling on how you did on the exam. Yeah, because I'm not going to post grades before the others. Everything has to come out at once.
Will we know how much extra credit
Yeah, I still have to write. Yeah, I mean the extra credit for the iClickers, right? On the 10th, after the 10th, really. So if you have been in class and getting, gathering those points, and you have a good idea of how much you have been gathering, then you should have know more or less how much. Okay. All right. So everybody's cool? Yeah. Questions? More questions? No. All right. So let's start the marathon here in the nervous system. Oh, I forgot to. Yeah, there we go. Yay! Party time. Okay. Okay. So here, let's go through the fundamentals of the nervous system. And I know it's a lot in this chapter, but we have covered some of this topic already when we were talking about action potentials, right? So now we're going to have a better idea in putting it together with the entire nervous system. So first thing you should have in mind is that you are sending information and deciding on what to do in response to that information. So you're using a lot of electrochemical processes. So things are going because of electricity and because chemical gradient, okay? So electrochemical signals. Then here, your nervous system is going to decide what to do, what kind of response you should have based on the information that is gathering. So here, the division of the book, we're going to see basically what are the cells of the nervous system. Then you're going to look a bit more on how those cells are responding. Again, we're going to revisit here the membrane potential and the contribution of different ions to the membrane potential and etc. And here we are going to look a little bit more at synapse. And let me see here. Yeah, and then basically how is it that neurons are working together. Okay. So what is it that your nervous system does? Well, it's going to receive signals, it's going to decide on what to do, and then is going to send appropriate response. Okay. So three basic functions that we're gathering here. You're going to receive the signal. So if you're gathering the signal, you're going to use sensory organs or different types of sensory inputs. Then you're going to do the processing of the signal, and that usually will happen. It will happen in the central nervous system. So here you're going from the periphery to the central nervous system. You're going to decide on what to do. You call that integration of the signals. And then you're going to decide on sending a signal out for the response. So then you're going to have your output. So three stages. You have input, integration, and output. Okay? So here, when you look at the different parts of the nervous system, you're going to have two main subdivisions. You're going to have your central nervous system, that is your brain and your spinal cord. And then you're going to have your peripheral nervous system, that is going to be everything else that is not the brain and the spinal cord. Okay? So here, looking at the beige-colored central nervous system, you have the brain and the spinal cord. That's all central. And then you look here at your orange-colored peripheral nervous system. So here are nerves of the periphery, everything else that is not showing, of course, more peripheral nerves, but everything else is your peripheral nervous system. Also, peripheral nervous system is going to include the nerves that are called cranial nerves. So the cranial nerves are connected directly to the brain. And then you're going to have here your spinal nerves. And then the spinal nerves are connected to the spinal cord. Okay, so we're going to see more about cranial nerves versus spinal nerves. All right, so here we start looking at the axon and in general the cells that are making up the nervous system. Okay, so we know that the main thing of those cells is that they can get excited. They are excitable cells. And then once they get excited, they receive some signals, they are going to use electrical conductivity to respond on what to do, right? Not only they have a lot of this electricity going on, but at the time when you reach the end of the cell, you're going to do something to transform whatever signal was processed over here into some other form of signaling that you can send a message to the next cell or the next neuron. Okay. Now imagine that this cell of this neuron cell is surrounded by this membrane, and whatever electrical signal that is going to happen within this cell here is going to be transmitted through the membrane. But when it comes to the end, the electrical signal is not going to jump from one cell to the next. You have to transform the signal into some kind of chemical signal first, and then you're going to receive the chemical signal at your next cell, and then that cell is going to reinterpret the signal and transform it back to electrical signal. Okay, so the end of this neuron here will have to do some form of signaling that has to do with chemicals. So that means the end of the neuron is going to have some secretory function. Okay, so the neuron can be excited, can conduct electricity, and it has to have secretory functions. Okay, so this is very important characteristic of neurons. Besides all that, neurons are very notorious for being amitotic. That means they do not divide. Okay, so the neurons, the differentiated neurons, they do not divide. Okay, but to compensate for that, the neurons really last with you like throughout your life. They have very, very long longevity, and they are going to be, with you from the time that the neuron is formed all the way to the time of your death. Okay, so they're supposed to be there for all of your lifetime, unless they get damaged. Okay. All right. Now, if you have neurons in your brain that get damaged, usually those are not going to recover. Okay, that's the downsize of these neurons in the CNS. But if you have some neurons in the periphery that get damaged, sometimes those can recover depending on the extent of the damage. Okay, so neurons in the periphery, if you're talking about the axon that gets damaged, but the cell body is intact. Here is your ghost cell body, right? So yeah, I forgot to draw here your cell body. So dendrites, and here dendrites. So here's your cell body, and that's your nucleus right there. And here is your axon hillock connecting your body to the axon, right? So if your cell body is intact, then you have good chance that the axon can fix itself. It can regenerate. Okay, this is in the periphery. Okay. So here we see functions of periphery nervous system. Okay. So basically, we're going to have two functions for nerves that are in the periphery. One of them is the feeling. Okay, so we have sensory function. So this sensory function is going to bring information from the outside to the CNS. So it's going to be like arriving at the CNS. You call those functions afferent division of the nervous system. Okay. So bringing information to the CNS is part of your sensory nervous system. And within this sensory subdivision, you're still going to have two other subdivisions or subdivisions. You're going to have fibers that are bringing information from your somatic sensory endings, like from the skin, from muscles, from joints, more on the extremity of your body, right? All the way to the central nervous system. And then you're going to have other nerves that are going to bring information from your gut, so visceral information to your CNS. So two types of sensory nerves that are going to bring information to the CNS. And of course, this is all in the periphery. Okay. All right, so this is information coming in, and then you're going to have the bunch of nerves that are going to take information from the CNS to the extremities. So those would be your efferent or motor types of neurons. Okay, so you're going to have, in this case, you're going to have transmission of whatever you're thinking of doing from your brain to the periphery, and those are going to use motor neurons. Okay, they're going to come from the CNS and get to the organs that that have to respond. Okay. Within these motor neurons, you also have subdivisions. You have the ones that are somatic. That's the one that you can control just by thinking about doing something, right? So if I'm writing something on the board here, I'm sending out somatic nervous system type of information. And then you have the other type that is not at your will. So this one is the automatic, or mainly, autonomic. So you think autonomic, you think automatic. You don't really think about it. The thing happens on its own. Okay. So here's an example of sensory neurons that are bringing information from the outside, right, to the inside, and then your central nervous system is going to decide on something to do. But several times you don't need for the information to get all the way to your brain for your CNS to respond to certain stimulus, like in the example here of a reflex reaction. Right, so you have this guy here that by accident touched a hot plate. Right? So you know that if you touch something hot, your hand is going to jerk away from the thing that is hot, because of course your body has to preserve itself from getting damaged, right? And what happens here is actually a short loop of a reflex reaction in which the information came from the hand, went only to the spinal cord, and then within the spinal cord you had a relay of decision-making neurons that send out a signal for those muscles to contract even before you felt the pain. Okay, so this is a type of reflex reaction that uses sensory nervous system connected to motor nervous system that allowed your response to be very fast and without really thinking about it. This is automatic response. All right, so let's look here at your somatic nervous system. So that's the one that you can control. Okay, so it comes from your CNS to your skeletal muscles, basically, because you can't really control anything other than your skeletal muscles, right, if you really think about it. Okay. When you compare here to your autonomic nervous system, that is basically everything else that is not your skeletal muscle. Right? So you're going to have nerves that are innervating the organs and glands, right? And you're going to have here smooth muscles that are going to respond to this autonomic nervous system. You're also going to have your cardiac muscles that are going to respond based on the information that is sent out automatically, right? And as I mentioned, you have glands that also respond this way, and you can't control it. Okay. Now, autonomic nervous system has two subdivisions right? So autonomic is, you say autonomic, you think automatic. So within the autonomic nervous system, you're going to have two subdivisions. You're going to have one that is sympathetic. This is your fight or flight type of reaction. And then you're going to have the one that is parasympathetic, and that is your rest and digest type of reaction. So usually these two are trying to balance each other out. So if you have more sympathetic, your parasympathetic goes down. If you have more parasympathetic, then your sympathetic tends to go down. Okay. So those are really like balancing each other out. Okay. So let's see what this graph is saying here. How is it that the nervous system is organized? So here, you have your central nervous system, that is your brain, your spinal cord, right? And that has, the job for this thing is to integrate information, decide what to do, send information out. So you can integrate information that is coming from the outside, or you can integrate information that you're really generating inside of your CNS, and then you send the information out. So what is happening here? You are getting information from all of your peripheral nervous system, deciding what to do, and then you're going to send information out. So how is it that you're going to get information? Well, you have here the fibers, that the nerves that are coming from sensory organs. So you have your sensory division here, and that includes both somatic and visceral types of nerves. Okay. So these things are going to come in through this peripheral nervous system and get to the brain. That's all the information that you get from the outside of the CNS world. Okay. When you send information from CNS to the everything else that is not the CNS, yeah. Okay, so that is a more complicated question than it should be given. But yeah, it's a good question. If you say like sensory organs like your eyes or your nose, those are directly connected to your CNS. And so that like your eyes, they're in some textbook already considered CNS. So when people say, the eyes are the gateway to the soul, and you assume the soul is in your brain, so that's like a direct connection. It's like right there. No, you're going to be responsible for what I cover in the class, because when you get to sensory organs, that gets to be a bit more complex than the level we need to cover here. Okay, but I will mention a few things here and there that you should keep in the back of your mind, because when you get to more advanced classes, you say, oh, I remember briefly looking at this. Okay, so at least you can situate yourself on where to pick up and start and go ahead. Okay, you're welcome. And you see, it's really interesting when you look at cranial nerves, since they're directly connected to the brain. When you have some spinal cord injury, that does not affect your facial nerves. Okay. All right, so here, when you're sending information out, right? So you're going to send information to this motor division, okay? And within this motor division, you're going to have two types of routes that this information can take. One of them is going to be not depending on your will, so that's your autonomic response. And the other one is depending on what you decide is your somatic response. Okay, so somatic response really has to do with what you can control on the muscular skeletal level. And then in your automatic response or autonomic response, this will have to do with a kind of response that is appropriate for the original information that you gather. So you can have either excitation of sympathetic neurons, or you can go through the parasympathetic route and have a more relaxed, rest and digest type of response. Okay. So here, let's take a better look at the neuron. Okay, so this type of neuron, we're going to have several sub-classifications of neurons, but this is the most common type of neuron in which you have a lot of these protrusions. Those are dendrites. They're close to the cell body. Okay, so these parts here, they are really responsible for receiving information that is coming from everywhere else. Okay, so this is going to gather information. It's going to go to the cell body. You're going to process the information, and if you have enough electrical signal to cross a threshold that is right here at the connection between your body and your axon, that's the axon hillock. If you get enough information to pass threshold electricity or threshold membrane potential over there, then you're going to send the signal down the axon, and this is called your conductive segment, okay, down the axon. That is going to go to the terminals that you call the transmissive part of the axon, okay, transmissive part of the neuron. So looking at your neuron, you have your receptive part, you have the part that starts the action potential, so that's the initial part. Then you have the part that carries the action potential down, there's a conductive part. And then you have the part that is going to communicate with other cells, so that's your transmissive part. All right. So here again, looking at this structure of the neuron, keep in mind that some neurons are really, really big. Like if you imagine the neuron that is going from your spinal cord all the way to your big toe, that is a huge axon for that neuron. Okay, and there are certain terms that are used with this type of cells, right? So one that I mentioned here is dendrites, right? And then you have your cell body, axon hillock. And here, when you look at the cell membrane, and it is part of your axon, you call that the axiolemma, right? So this is the cell membrane part. If you look at the cytoplasm that is making here the axon, you call that the axoplasm, right? So this is goes hand in hand with the nomenclature for compared to when you look at muscle cells. Sarcoplasm, sarcolemma. So here you're looking at axon, axoplasm, and axolemma. Let me see what is important here. Okay, so you have certain specializations in the cell body that are particular to the type of neuron that that you're looking at. For example, if you have a neuron that is that has to produce a certain neurotransmitter, you know that the exocytosis of that neurotransmitter is going to be very intense for the neuron, right? And in order to produce the neurotransmitter, most neurotransmitters are produced in the cell body. Not all of them. We looked at one example of neurotransmitter that was acetylcholine, right, for neuromuscular junction. Now, acetylcholine is produced at the axon, close to the axon terminal, right? But most other neurotransmitters are produced in the cell body, and then they are packed into little vesicles, and then the vesicles are carried down the axon all the way to the axon end. So if you're going to produce a lot of proteins, when you look at the endoplasmic reticulum of the axon, you're going to see that the ER is very much extensive in these neurons. So this composition, this particular organization of rough ER that is really packed with ribosomes and doing a lot of work on producing those proteins that are destined to be excreted or secreted, actually secreted, you see that you call these arrangements, you call them Nissl bodies. Okay, so here is Nissl body. It's not a missile, okay, so it's a Nissl body, okay? And you also see that neurons they use a lot of energy. They need to produce a lot of ATPs to get these things going. To move the vesicles, you need ATPs. To produce proteins, you need ATP equivalent, which is GTP, right? The ribosomes use GTP for energy. So you're going to have a lot of mitochondrial presence in the neuron. Okay, so a lot of mitochondria. So mitochondria use up a lot of energy, and they also, make the ATPs, right? Do you know in average how much of your total energy consumption is actually consumed by your brain? Huh? A third, a little bit less. It's more like 20%. And it also depends, this was like a kind of a rhetorical question, because it depends on how much you use your brain, right? If you're just like sitting in the class, kind of almost falling asleep, it's like, she's talking about the neuron. So that's not a lot of energy usage, right? But if you're over there, it's like, I gotta take notes. Okay, neuron, what the hell is the neuron? Oh, okay, inside the mitochondria, and then you're thinking about things. Then is when your brain is using up the energy. And your brain, compared to the rest of your body, it's what, 3 pounds of stuff? And if you're an average, person weighing about 150 pounds or so, I was going to say kilos, that's like, oh my God, no, pounds, right? Compare 3 pounds to the rest, 147, that's not a lot of mass, but using about 20% of your energy, that is impressive, right? So you do need a lot of nutrients or glucose to get to your brain, and you need a lot of oxygen to be fueling all of this energy production. What happens if you do not deliver oxygen to your brain for more than 5 minutes? You get neurons that are going to die. That's bad news, right? Because they don't recover. Then you get the brain damage. Okay. Okay. All right. So here is just on putting more words what I have just mentioned about your axon hillock. There. Of course, this has to stop working. Okay. All right. So here, let's see. When you get all the way down to the end of your axon, and the axon starts branching because it has to reach different cells. Well, here is kind of misleading, showing that all these axons are ending up in one cell, which is kind of redundant, right? So let's say this axon is branching out to reach other cells. That branching process here, you call that telodendria. Okay, so those are not dendrites over here, dendrites over there. These guys here are not dendrites, they are telodendria. They are coming out from the branching at the end of your axon. Now, when you reach the target cells, you see that those little endings of the neurons, they kind of look like little doorknobs, the round type of doorknobs. So you call them synaptic knobs. Okay, so here, let's emphasize here. You have your synaptic knobs, like right there. And that's where you're going to have your electrical signal that gets converted to chemical signal to reach the target cell. All right, so here, what is happening here at the synapse? And we had seen that before. Right, so you have here your telodendrion that has branched from your axon, okay, and the whole thing is from your presynaptic cell, so it's before the synapse to the target cell, okay, and when you look here at this ending of your telodendrion, that you're going to find your little knob, okay. So when you look at the little knob, you're going to find a few things. First thing that you can see that is quite obvious is the presence of mitochondria. So here you're showing only one huge mitochondrion, but you can imagine that you have many mitochondria present over there, because this is a site that you're going to have to use a lot of energy. Remember, like you have with the musculoskeletal, with the neuromuscular neuron, you have here usage of energy when, for example, when you are packing those little vesicles with acetylcholine. Remember the type of pump that you need to pack acetylcholine in the vesicles? What is that pump? It's a hydrogen pump, right? And use ATP to do the pumping, right? So besides that, you remember that when your electrical signal is coming down the membrane and you have all this action potential going on, you're going to have to restabilize the resting potential. So you're going to have your sodium-potassium pump at the membrane that is going to use a lot of ATP to reestablish your resting membrane potential. So you need to produce a lot of energy down here at the end of the axon, right? So a lot of mitochondria there. Then what else you're going to have? You're going to have those little vesicles. They're going to be ready to fuse with the membranes, right? So those little vesicles are going to be packed with your neurotransmitter, okay? So when you look at the little vesicles and they're small and they're carrying, this neurotransmitter, you compare with other types of membrane enclosed bags that are much bigger, you have different names for those too. So things that are tiny carrying neurotransmitters, you call them vesicles, right? And things that are huge, kind of carrying other stuff, you call those vacuoles. Okay, so here we have vesicles. Okay, vesicles, tiny vesicles. So, okay, so here when you get close to your target cell, you're going to have your synapse. You can also call it the synaptic cleft, okay? And then the cell that receives the stuff, that is your postsynaptic cell. Okay. All right. So an information here that is important to know, when you get vesicles that are coming from your body and getting all the way here to your axon, you call that axoplasmic type of transport. Actually, you have two types of axoplasmic transport. You have a transport that comes from the cell body and goes all the way to the end of the axon. And then you have other type of transport that comes from the axon and goes up comes from the synapse, close to the synapse, and then goes up all the way to the cell body. So this type of transport that goes backward is called retrograde. The type of transport that goes forward is called anterograde. Okay, so two names here that you should be familiar with. Retrograde goes back, anterograde goes forward. So here, looking at the types of synapses, you can have synapses that are between two neurons. Okay. You can have synapses that are between neuron and muscles, like skeletal muscles. So here are your neuromuscular junctions. And then you have synapses that are going to be connected to glands. So you have neuroglandular type of synapses. Okay. When you have synapses between neurons, you just call those synapses. Okay. So when you look at your CNS, you're not only going to find neurons, you're also going to find supportive cells and different types of supportive cells. So one of them is your neuroglia. Okay, you can call them glia as well. So neuroglial cells. So glial cells. There are several types of glial cells, and mainly their role is support maintenance of the environment and clean up. We have some glial cells that are phagocytotic, okay? And you also have glial cells that are important for conducing nerve impulses or keeping the electricity in check. Okay. So here is the first type of glial cells that you come across. And these guys here are astrocytes. Okay. So what are astrocytes? You look at this thing here, and you see that these astrocytes are, you have actually several types of those astrocytes, but they kind of look like a star. So it looks like they have a lot of those dendrites, but then these guys here are not really neurons. Okay, so let's see what happens here with these astrocytes. These guys, they are really going to associate with neurons, not only with the neurons that like you see here, this yellow cell in the back, but they're also going to associate with blood vessels, with tiny blood vessels. They're called capillaries. Okay. Now, what the astrocyte is going to do, it is going to have a very important function in blocking a lot of things that should not get to your central nervous system. So these guys here, they are going to be part of your blood-brain barrier. Okay, so they're going to really block the diffusion of things that shouldn't get in the brain in the first place. Okay, so they're going to support neurons. They're going to also connect to small blood vessels and have a role on blood-brain barrier. So they're going to control the environment of chemicals that gets to the CNS, or the things that don't get to the CNS. Now, when they go around neurons, they are going to control the electrical signals that are going from neuron to neuron. Okay, so they have this transmissive type of control. Okay, so they really have a big say on how the neurons work. Okay, and they do also participate on this information processing that is going on in the brain. Now, besides all that, when the brain is already formed, you have these astrocytes that function during brain development on shaping how the brain develops at a normal pattern. Okay, so you have a lot of those influences to proper brain development. So here, when you look at other cell types, they're called microglial cells. All right, so you look at astrocytes. So now we look at this guy here that if you look at him, you actually think that it's probably nervous, right? I mean, you look at it and it's like, was it struck by lightning or something? You know, kind of gives you this impression. And try to put a little personality to it. It's a cyclops guy. It has only one eye. Of course, that's the nucleus, right? So he's a cyclops guy that is kind of looking nervous. All right. So what is this thorny thing doing? Well, when you see these protrusions coming from the cell, either dendrites or axons, you call those processes, right? So same type of nomenclature as we have seen with the bones, right? So these processes here, when you look at this nervous guy, it seems like they're full of thorns. So you say, oh, those are like thorny processes, okay? What these guys do is that they are very good at getting rid of microorganisms that somehow made their way into your CNS, okay? So let's say that you have some bacterium that came over there. So this guy goes after the bacterium and it eats up the bacterium. So this thing has phagocytic properties, okay? So it can phagocytize microorganisms. Now, when you have certain cells that die, either glial cells or even neurons that die, you have to have somebody who's going to go there and clean up the garbage. So this microglial cell is also important at cleaning up the garbage. Okay, so it picks up debris. Now, so you see that they don't really just stay stuck to one place, like you have seen with the astrocytes, right? Those are like wrapped up vessels, and they're not going to move around. But these guys here, they are able to move around and figure out if you have any invaders or if you have dead stuff that has to be picked up. Okay, so these guys really, really move around, and they're very important for the immune system of the brain. Okay, so it's a defensive type of function for the brain. So now here we come across another type of cells, and those are really cool. They're called ependymal cells. And as I say in the class, do not get confused with ependymal cells. These guys here are not ependymal cells, they are ependymal cells. And it's in the brain. Where do you find ependymal cells? No, the ependymal cells, yeah. What about ependymal? Yeah. But those are ependymal. Yeah. Male reproductive system? We didn't get there yet. So that's A&P2. So don't misspell that. Okay? I mean, you're not writing on the test anyway, so you gotta figure out which one is this. Okay. Now, what is with these cells here? Look at this. You have one area in which these cells are in contact with the brain tissue or spinal cord tissue. And then on the other area, you have all of this cilia. So you have ciliated cells here. And when you have cilia in cells, what they're doing, they're going to be pushing things around. What is it that these things are pushing around is your cerebrospinal fluid. So the cerebrospinal fluid that you find in cavities of the brain and also in your spinal cord, cerebrospinal fluid is not just sitting there, it's being moved around all the time. Okay, so how is it gets moved around? Because these cells are always beating the cilia and is making sure that you have this fluid motion for your CSF. Okay, so big job for these cells is to circulate CSF. Right? Now, how is those cells look? As you see here, they're kind of like columnar looking, but they can go from flat to columnar. So they have different heights for these cells. So they're going to be lining up all the central cavities that have to do with brain and the spinal cord. Besides that, they are very important for, let me see here, if I have it here, I don't have it here, okay, I believe for producing the CSF, but here, oh, okay, so it's saying that it's very important for moving it around, okay, so that was your ependymal cells. So here, the next one is your oligodendrocyte. So break this into pieces. Sites is for cells, of course. Oligo means a lot of something, like when you do oligomerization, you put monomers together to get a lot of stuff. And then dendro should remind you of dendrites. So the name of the cell is many dendrites, so cells that have many dendrites. Okay, so now you look at the cell and you say, oh, look at this guy here. It has dendrite coming this way, that way, that way. But then you'd think, oh, other cells are also full of dendrites. But how you name this one? I mean, what is the role of this guy over here? It's not a neuron. Okay, it's not a neuron. It's oligodendrocyte. And the most important job for this thing is that each one of those dendrite-like protrusions, they are going to wrap around axons of neurons. So you have this cell that is stretching out to an arm, and it is wrapping up the axon, and it is wrapping up the axon. And every time you have an axon that is wrapped up in this cytoplasm, this part of the axon gets insulated. Okay, so this thing is what you call this myelin sheath of insulation on your axons. Okay, now notice that one oligodendrocyte is not only associated with an axon, it's associated with many axons. And here it's showing 3 for simplicity, but you could have this cell that associates to up to 60 different axons. Okay, so it's a cell like with a lot of those dendrite-like protrusions, right? So this is only present in the central nervous system. Because remember, you have seen axons, they are myelinated in the periphery, but The cells that do demyelination in the periphery is not the same type of cell that does demyelination in the CNS. Okay, so this guy that does myelination in the CNS, those are your oligodendrocytes. And what is the name of the cell that does myelination in peripheral? Schwann cells, right? So two different types of cells that can do this myelin sheath business. And then remember that between those covered sessions, you're going to have those nodes of Ranvier. And that's where you're going to have a concentration of your sodium and potassium channels, right? That those are your voltage sensitive sodium and potassium channels are going to be concentrated in those nodes of Ranvier. And what is the name of the action potential that goes through this insulated type of axon? We mentioned that in class. Jumping, saltatory, right? Saltatory action potential. We're going to look a little bit more at that. So more here on your supportive glial cells. You have here satellite cells, okay? And let me see here what is happening with these satellite cells. They are going to be protecting cell bodies, okay? Both in the peripheral nervous system and in the central nervous system, okay? So you have satellite cells that are protecting the cell body. And other types of cells, like I just mentioned here, you have your Schwann cells that are going to be responsible for myelination of peripheral axons, right? So when you look at the Schwann cell, it's a whole cell that wraps around the axon. Okay. And the function, again, is similar to your oligodendrocyte. Okay, another very important function for your Schwann cells, okay, is that when you have some kind of damage to the axon, the Schwann cell is responsible for trying to correct that damage, for trying to regenerate that piece of the axon. Okay, so it's really, really important for regeneration of damaged peripheral axons. We call them peripheral nerve fibers. Okay, everybody got that? Okay, and I do think a question is going to come up soon. I did put questions in here. All right, so different types of neurons. So they look different from each other, and they should have different names. All right, so let's look at this first guy over here. Can you find an axon over there? No. So you call this the no axon guy. Anaxonic neuron. That's easy to spot. No axon. And now let's look at this other guy here. This other guy here has a cell body that is right in the middle. And then he has this process that is going this way, another process that is going that way. And it so happens that this process that is going this way is actually a dendrite. So it's a long dendrite that looks like an axon, but it's called the dendritic process. Because up here, you're going to have dendrites that are gathering information and bringing the information to the cell body. Right? So something that is bringing information to the cell body, those are in general dendrites. So this thing over here is a dendritic process. On the other side, now you're going to have the axon that is going to bring the information from the cell body to the synaptic terminus. So this guy here, you call it a bipolar neuron. So you get information coming from this side to the cell body, and then another process that is the axon. So dendrite and axon, that's your bipolar neuron. So right here. Where do you usually find those? You're going to find them a lot in special sense organs, like vision and smell. That's when you find your bipolar neurons. All right. And where do you find this guy over here? Mainly in the brain. Okay. All right. Next one on the line here. It kind of looks like the bipolar, but it's not really, because when you look here at these two types of processes, they're kind of continuous. Okay, you don't have the cell body in the middle dividing the processes. So these processes here is actually one type of process. So what you have here is axon that goes this way, axon that goes that way, okay? But look what happens here. In the middle, you have this connection to the cell body that is kind of on this side. So you have this T type of connection of these two axons. Now this axon here, it gets connected to dendrites. Okay, so you have dendrites that use this axon to bring information to the cell body, but then this axon is continuous to the rest of the axon here, right? So this cell body is going to process the information and send it down that way. But that guy is really called unipolar, all right? And it has another name like pseudo bipolar, but I think it's already complicated if you call it unipolar. Well, let's call it unipolar because the connection of these two things to the cell body is only by one extension, okay, by one process. So this is your unipolar type of neuron. Okay. And the last one that you have here is the type that you find usually that you're more comfortable and more familiar with. That is your multipolar neuron. So multipolar, you have all these dendrites that connect to the cell body, and then one long axon that is going to go to the terminals. That's the most common type, and that's your multipolar. Okay, everybody cool with that? Okay, oh, I thought the question was here. Oh, I guess it's next. All right. So here, just putting in words what I have just mentioned. Okay. So here is a picture of your unipolar neuron. Okay. So direction of flow here, you have dendrites on one side, and you get the information that comes to the cell body and then down the axon. All right. So here you have some certain type of a peripheral process and then a central process. Okay. So that's the depiction of your unipolar neuron. So here is an example of a bipolar neuron, and this is a picture of a neuron at the retina of your eye, okay, the back of your eye. So here you see that you have dendrites, dendritic processes that are going to gather the information, and here you have the cell body right in the middle and process the information and take the information to the terminals for further processing, right? So the information is coming from your sensory organ like the retina and is going to your central nervous system. And you find this type of neuron also involved with smell and hearing, right? So hearing and olfaction. Okay. And here is a picture of a multipolar neuron, which we're quite familiar with. And here is a histology type of staining of the multipolar neuron. Okay. And this is straight from your book. And what I like about this is that you have here the subdivisions of where the cell is gathering information and how the cell is processing and sending information out. Okay, so in the case of here of your multipolar neuron, so it's gathering information here, triggering the action potential, going down and transmitting information. So this is your secretory region, right, where its information gets transmitted to the next neuron or next thing, right? When you look here at your bipolar, so you have here the gathering information that is quite large, and then you have transmission and secretory part on the other side. Okay, so that's your bipolar. And here, when you look at your unipolar, that is also called pseudo-unipolar, right? What you're going to have, you have an area of gathering information, a long, very, very big area of transmission, and with the cell body in the middle, and then secretory region also on the other side. Okay. All right, so here is also from your book. Okay, so you can locate where to find those types of neurons. Okay, you can read that on your own. I want to focus on the things that are more not so obvious. Okay, so we have a multipolar. Okay, this is important here. So remember I said multipolar type of neuron is basically a neuron that is relying information, and you find it a lot in inside the central nervous system, right? So here is an example of a multipolar neuron that is actually between two neurons, that is in the gray matter of your spinal cord. Okay, as we're going to see, the brain and the spinal cord, they have one area that is whitish and another area that is grayish. When you look at the spinal cord, the whitish area is to the outside and the gray area is to the inside. The reason why the outside area, or the reason why the white area looks whitish, is because the axons of those neurons are myelinated. So the myelin sheets make that thing look whitish. Okay, so the cell bodies are going to be more towards the gray area. Okay, so here an example of a multipolar neuron is a neuron that is an interneuron. That means between two neurons. So this guy is going to process the information and relay into the the transmission of the information to the next neuron. Okay. That's your interneuron over there. All right, here I mentioned the bipolar that is involved with sensory organs. And here is an example of unipolar that is gathering information and bringing it to the CNS. So in this case here, you can also have unipolar coming this way over here. All right, so unipolar comes to the CNS. Okay. I just mentioned that. Oh, finally your question. So put this on. All right, the nervous system has three overlapping functions. Which of the following represents a logical sequence of these three functions? So this should be an easy question to answer. It shouldn't take more than 30 seconds to answer that. Does anyone need more time? Awake clickers worked? Yeah, you got your points? Everybody still awake? All right, what is your answer? C. Come on, all right. Okay. All right, so let's look at more terms that are involved with your nervous system, right? Now look at this. Where you find your cell body. Okay. Now, if you have cell bodies that are inside of your central nervous system, so cell bodies, a lot of concentration of those cell bodies that are inside of the central nervous system, you call that gathering of cell bodies, you call that a nucleus, okay? Or different cell, concentration of these cell bodies, you call it nuclei. So that has to do with the central nervous system. When you find a lot of cell bodies that are gathering in the periphery, not in the CNS, you don't call those nuclei, you call them ganglia. Okay? Cluster of neuron cell bodies in periphery is ganglia. How are you going to remember that? Well, the gangs like to go to the periphery. Okay? So the ganglia is cell body in the peripheral nervous system. Okay. Now, other terms that are important to know. Okay, those processes, right? So if you are talking about processes or mainly axons that are in the central nervous system, you call those tracts. So a bundle, a lot of processes, there are a lot of axons that are together in the CNS, those are called tracts. But if you look at bundles of those processes in the peripheral nervous system, you call them nerves, okay? So here is where I like to give you that example that sometimes when you get into an argument with somebody, somebody may turn to you and say, you have the nerve, like you have something wrong with your brain, right? You know what I mean? And they are wrong, because if they want to say something is wrong with your brain processes, they should tell you you have the tract, right? So if you tell you like you have the nerve, it's like you mean the tract. Okay, now as I mentioned in my previous lecture, make sure that when you make this kind of comment, you are at a very good distance from the person, because if they have a reflex reaction, you are not going to be hit, right? Yeah. So when you say you have the nerve, it's like, no, next time you're going to tell somebody, you have the tract, and I didn't think about it. Okay. Tract in CNS, nerves in the periphery. Okay. So we know types of processes. Dendrites, axons, we are happy. Everybody good? No. So here, as we mentioned, if you have ganglion is ganglion stuff in the cell body, I mean in the periphery, we just mentioned that. Okay, and this is a cool thing, right? Neuron processes and what is happening in there. Remember I mentioned that if you have vesicles that are going up and down the body to the axon and to the terminal, you have the movement of those vesicles, but the vesicles don't move by themselves. They have to have certain very specialized proteins that are going to use ATP and move this huge vesicle either up or down that axon. Okay, so motor proteins are very, very important for moving those things around. Where else have you seen motor proteins? Okay, I do have chocolate. Where else have we seen motor proteins? Everybody awake? I got chocolate. What moves? Muscles. Who wants a chocolate? Oh, everybody wants a chocolate now. Okay, wait. Yes, your muscles are going to move. Whoop. Okay, wait. I know. That's the break for the class. Okay, watch your eyes. Everybody awake? Watch it. I practice. Woo! Probably you're too much. Sorry. Okay, somebody catch the chocolate. Yeah. So those things here that are moving around, they're motor proteins. What are they going to use to move around? ATP, right? ATP. Movement from the cell body all the way down, you call anterograde. Movement going back is retrograde, just like with the planets. And here is a picture of how your thing gets moved around. And hopefully this thing was going to work, but it's not working. Oh yeah, look at that. You see this little guy with the feet, look at the feet. Every time you use ATP, you're doing the cocking of the head and moving the conformation of those proteins. Now you see the size of this vesicle that little guy is carrying, right? I never seen anybody dressed up as a motor protein, like a kinesin, right? For Halloween. Imagine the kid, like you have the motor protein on the feet, carrying a big globe, and you go house to house with the feet. That's painful. Okay. Actually, I tell you, anybody had the kids in Halloween that came to your house? Yeah. Yeah, we moved to a new house that is in a cul-de-sac. A lot of old people around, not a lot of kids. So we get this one kid that rang the doorbell. Ate something, not wearing a costume. I said, yeah, trick or treating, yeah. So I gave him a case. I came down this way because all the kids are on the other side, but I know you guys bought some candy, so I felt sorry for you guys. I'm like, oh, thank you. Anyway, I'll be bringing more candy for these next 2 weeks. Okay. Okay, so here are your vesicles, more points. All right. So this should be easy. Movement of substances towards the cell body of a neuron is termed. Yes, for your last 2 minutes, you get those points. And while you're getting your points, I am going to tell you for the rest of this lecture, I am going to put in the video, and you guys are responsible for it because we have to, you know, pick up the space. Yeah. You go over this. There are 3 of them because I'm combining 1.5 and 1.5. Okay? Yeah. You go over this one only. Okay? If you want to read ahead and be ahead of time, that's fine with me. Okay? But this one is for this here, the PowerPoint here. I'm going to put the video for you to catch up with the rest of it. And then on Wednesday, we pick up on the other PowerPoint that I still have to put together. Okay? All right, so what's your answer? A. And I still had people who gave me wrong answers. Okay, so let's stop here and make sure that you can